Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book, and I'm so excited for tonight's event. But before we get into it, I wanted to give everybody a quick little rundown of what is going on with us here at the store. We are just about done with events for 2022. On this Saturday, the 10th, we're going to have our in-store holiday open house starting at 2 o'clock with Freddie Cruz, who is a former DJ on 104 here in town. He's been at the store multiple times to interview authors with us. His new book, Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas, is out now. And so he's going to kick things off at our open house at 2 on Saturday. And then we'll also have some live holiday music around 5 o'clock. So hope you will check that out. And then last event of the year, we've got one more virtual event coming up for 2022. And that is going to be on Wednesday, December 28th. For you cozy readers out there, we're going to be chatting with Ellie Alexander, Olivia Black, Valerie Burns, and Darcy Wilde about their new releases, which I think all come out on the 28th. So I hope that you will come back and check that out. We've got lots of stuff coming up in store for 2023, so I hope you'll check out the in-store calendar. It's starting to finally feel like a normal event schedule for the first time since January, February of 2020. So we're really excited for stuff that we've got coming up. But tonight, before we get started, I also wanted to mention Ellen Byron's book, Wined and Died, was originally supposed to come out today. So this was going to be a joint release for both of them, but it has been postponed to February 7th of 2023. If you still want to get copies, if you want to get them for gifts, if you want to get them for yourself, we do have a little PDF that Ellen has made up that we can send to you that if it's for a gift that will say like, hey, a copy of this has been purchased for you and will be available in February. So if you need a little certificate to go in a stocking or to wrap up for a present, we've got those. And if you have questions for Greg or Ellen tonight while they're chatting, please post those in the comments on Facebook or the live chat on YouTube, and we will get to them in a little bit. But as I said, we're so excited for tonight's event. I was just telling Greg before we went live that I loved A Streetcar Named Murder, and I'm now wishing that he had been writing cozies earlier than this because it was so good, and I'm really excited to see where the series goes. So we're going to get started. I'm going to bring Ellen out first. How are you tonight, Ellen?
I'm good. My doggy is going a little crazy. So I have a 16-year-old dog, and he's plus, and he's makes his own mind up when he needs to use the facilities, which happen to be right now. I think are going to be
if you want to go ahead. I can introduce Greg, and he and I can chat for a second.
Let me try. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay, so I'm going to bring Greg out. How are you tonight, Greg?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. You like my kitchen? My
lovely
studio. My lovely studio. I spared no expense.
So Greg has a new book out. He's writing as T.G. Herren. The new book is called A Streetcar Named Murder. It just came out today. So T.G. Herren is a longtime resident of New Orleans, where every day is anything can happen day. He has also worked as a sports and fitness journalist and editor and spent far too many years working in the airline industry. Somehow I did not know that you also worked in the airline industry as well.
We've never talked about that.
Apparently not. I don't know how that's possible.
I don't either. I worked for Continental Airlines, Houston. Oh. Yes.
Oh. It's so weird that somehow has never come up in like the 20 years that we've known each other.
I know. That's really, really strange. I worked for Continental Airlines from April of 1990 to, I think, October of 95.
Wow.
Yeah, I started in Houston. I worked in Houston for a year, and then I was transferred to Tampa, and I came back to Houston a few times, but for brief periods of time. That's why I knew how I know Houston so well, because I lived there for a while.
Awesome. So while we are waiting for Ellen to pop back up, I think there she is. There we have Ellen. I'm going to give her a second to get situated before I just pop her on the screen. All right.
Sorry.
Hello.
So, as I was saying before, my life is not my own. So I'm sure you introduced Greg to the utmost extent, and I can take over, and I have a bunch of questions.
Perfect. Yeah. So let me introduce Ellen officially too. Ellen Byron is the Agatha Award-winning, Agatha Award-winning and USA Today bestselling author of the Cajun Country Mysteries. As Maria DeRico, she also writes the Catering Hall series, and she also has the fantastic vintage cookbook mystery series. Bayou Book Thief is the first, which is available now. And as we said, the second in the series, Wined and Died, will be out in February. So I am going to leave Greg, I'm going to leave you in Ellen's more than capable hands, and I will be behind the scenes listening in. So if you guys need me, holler, but I will see you in just a little bit.
Thanks so much, and thanks for being so patient. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Ellen.
Hi. So just to introduce, Greg and I are good friends, and we share a passion for New Orleans. We're also both on the National Mystery Writers of America board. But Greg, I want to start. Your book is so wonderful, and it's so New Orleans. So can you tell me a little about what inspired the book and like the premise and the specific story?
Well, John was asking me that before while you were gone, and I had been wanting to write a cozy series or try to write a cozy I've been thinking about it for a really, really, really long time, but something else would always come up before I would get going on it. And so my partner told me about a costume shop that was near his office, and he'd gone in there to look for something, and he started. And Paul, have you actually met Paul?
No, I haven't met him yet.
Well, Paul will talks to everybody. He's that kind of a person, so he'll just start talking to everybody, and then he'll come home and tell me these amazing stories about people that he's just met. How do you get people to tell you this stuff? So anyway, so he started talking to him about the costume shop and how it worked and operated, and he thought it was fascinating. And he came home and he told me, you should write a book about a costume shop. And I thought, well, that would make an interesting cozy series. So that's what I kind of started out doing, but the publisher did not want the costume shop story. They wanted something else. And so what I was telling John I did was I went down to Magazine Street here in New Orleans and just with a notebook and just walked down and wrote down every kind of shop that I could see that I walked past. Then I came home and I emailed them the list, and they went for the antique shop. And like, okay, I can do it. I can do that. I don't know anything about antiques, but I can do that. And it was really, for me, it was really telling her story, Valerie's story. Right. I was really, really interested in Valerie and writing about her and what her life was like and where she was at in her life. And so kind of the whole antique stuff, the antique shop, even the costume shop was going to be was secondary to me in the first place. I know you need to have a hook for the series, the antique shops and things like in the bookstores and the things like coffee shops and things. But for me, I was really interested in her.
So let's talk a little about her. But by the way, I just have to say that the fact that they shot down a costume series means they don't know a lot about New Orleans. So,
well, that's the thing. Writing about New Orleans is very easy to default to what everyone knows.
Right.
But there's so much more, and what everyone knows is what everyone knows or what everyone thinks of when they think about New Orleans is a different world.
Sorry, I don't know how to turn my phone off, so I will occasionally, if it rings, I'll just turn it off.
So for me, I forgot what I was saying.
You were saying that I was asking about Valerie, and
the stuff that everybody knows about New Orleans, the things that you think of when you think about New Orleans, if you have never spent a great deal of time here, like you've lived here.
Sorry, just keep ignoring that.
And it's funny. I'm sorry, it makes me laugh.
Sorry.
Yeah, because that's usually what happens to me.
I throw the phone at, like, I literally would throw it across the room. I have never figured out how to turn a phone off and the phone completely off. So I think it would just ring from the base. So I'll just keep, if it rings again, I'll just keep it but tell us about Valerie.
So, well, yeah. So New Orleans, the stuff that nobody knows about New Orleans is much more interesting than the things that everybody does know about New Orleans.
Mhm.
Carnival, I wrote the blog entry the other day, which was Booze, Beads, and Bourbon Street, which are like the three least interesting things about New Orleans to me.
Yeah, especially Bourbon Street.
Especially Bourbon Street. And so it's fun for me because I get to share my love of New Orleans with everybody who doesn't live here, and get to show people a part of the city that they might not have been familiar with. I've been doing a lot of guest posting on blog posts on blogs lately, and it's interesting, a lot of the responses, the comments that they get, and people, they remember coming here and having a really good time, the great food, the great music.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm thinking, it's like, well, did you ever get out?
Yeah, I know.
Ever get
Now,
out?
why don't you tell people? I'm covering up the phone. I turned it. I like did a smart thing. I turned it on like I was making a call, and it went to. So now it's all covered up. It's under a pillow.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about Valerie, and because you said you really were interested in her. Let's tell us a little about her.
Well, the thing about Valerie that was interesting to me was, I love to read books by women, and I love to read books about women. I've always preferred reading about women than men. Always have. It's just most everything I read is I primarily read women writers.
That's so interesting.
And well, I think there's especially if you're interested in crime.
Yeah.
When I got to a certain age, after I'd gone through all the kids series and Agatha Christie and all of that, and Ellery Queen and Earl Stanley Gardner and all of those, it was the mid 70s. And I'll do with no disrespect intended, so much of the crime fiction of the 70s that was written by men was just so uninteresting to me.
Yeah.
And it still is. I'm just not really interested in the plight of the tragic straight white guy. I'm not really that interested in that. I never have been. And so I actually kind of got away from reading crime fiction for a very long time because I didn't enjoy it. It was the women that brought me back.
Oh, wow.
Sue Grafton, Sarah Paretsky, Marcia Muller brought me back to reading crime fiction. And then, I'd always read cozies, always had been reading cozies.
Really?
Yeah, I read them. I started reading them when I was a kid. I always liked them. And so I wanted to tell the story of Valerie, but a lot of the books that I've been reading about women, and it's great. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say that it's not great.
Yeah.
Professional career women are interesting to read about, and the things that they have to deal with, and crime fiction with strong female protagonists is very interesting to me. With Valerie, and I was very nervous about it because I know any number of women who are similar to Valerie who are in New Orleans, people who are not necessarily extremely well off, but they're not exactly having to worry about keeping a roof over their head completely. Mm-hmm. And when I started creating her, and I started wondering who she was, and I started figuring out who she was so interesting to me because she never really had much of a direction in her life. She was an only child. She never really interacted. She was not very outgoing or out sociable. She was not really interested in that sort of thing. And she didn't date a lot in high school. And on Fat Tuesday, she meets and falls in love with a fireman, and who's several years older than she is. And then so she basically drops out. She marries him. She's still going to school, and then she gets pregnant, and then she drops out of school. And so she spends the next 18 years. And of course, they're renovating the house. So they bought a wrecker house to renovate in New Orleans. And so she's doing a lot of the work herself while she's raising the kids because he's at work, and then he's helping out and so on and so forth. And then he dies, and she's left with the kids. And now the kids are at school, went off to school, and now she has well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And she's only 39. She's not
Oh
even,
wow, I forgot she was that young.
yeah, she's not even, she had the kids right away. She was
Yeah.
like 19 or 20 when she got married and had the kids. And so she's still young. I mean, really, 39 is
Yeah,
39 is very young.
super
I
young.
didn't think so at the time, but it's very, very, very young. And she needs to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. And it was interesting for me. It was really interesting to take her out of where she's been for so long and move her forward with the rest
Yeah.
of her life. I thought that was an interesting way to
It
write.
is. It's very, you follow her journey and her self-discovery in the book. And but it's got all the wonderful unique aspects like of New Orleans, like Crew of Boudica, like a woman's crew. Like talk a little about that. And then we have to talk about potholes. And also, Greg wrote a blog post today about saying don't rent a car when you come to New Orleans. But I don't know if you saw my note. You left something out about all the reasons why you shouldn't rent a car, which we always do anyway. But you left out one about school zones, which actually we have to talk about that because actually I use the school zones as an alibi in my book, in my first Buy Your Book Thief. But talk a little about like some of like the crew of Boudica and what that is and who and her friend who wants to join, her incredibly entertaining friend, and love her neighbor and bestie.
So we have, as you know very well, Mardi Gras is really just Fat Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's actually Carnival is what it's actually called. Fat Tuesday is Mardi Gras. So I've finally given up on trying to convince the rest of the world to be correct on this. I've stopped. I've finally surrendered. It's like, okay, just give in. It's Mardi Gras. Everyone calls it Mardi Gras. That's what it is. But every parade is put on by a carnival crew, and which is basically a club, kind of like a fraternity. I guess the easiest, or the Elks, things like that, where they generally, as a general rule, they usually have a charity that they support as well, and they do a lot of work with the charity, and they put on their parade every year and a ball, numerous parties throughout the year. And I believe Iris is the longest running women's crew in New Orleans. I don't think it's the first one, but it's been around. I think it was founded in 1940, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around for a long, long time. It's not quite as snooty as Rex or Comus, but Iris is like the society ladies. Mm-hmm. They're the wives of the men who belong to the big old-fashioned high society New Orleans crews. And there's also differences in the kinds of crews too.
Yeah, I have friends who are in the muses, and then I have friends who are in the dance troops. So.
Yeah, so I could spend hours just trying to differentiate the different kinds of crews there are, and the walking crews and the parading crews and the crews that don't. But Muses is one of my favorite parades, and I don't have one handy.
The shoe? You have a shoe?
Yeah,
they throw shoes, or they hand out shoes. But Boudica, now was that a fictional? The female crew. Tell everyone a little about it's Laura or Lorna, her friend.
Yeah, Lorna.
and because they end up at this, this.
Well, Muses became was a woman's crew that was founded about 10 years ago, and it became really, really popular and really, really huge. It's considered a super crew, and they have a massive wait list because everybody wants to be in Muses. And so other women's crews have been formed from the people off of the wait list for Muses, which is also kind of amusing. Didn't think I was going to go there, did you? And so Boudica is one of those. It's a spin-off of the women who got impatient waiting to get into Muses, so they formed their own crew. And so because Lorna wants to join the crew because she simply wants to ride in a parade. That's all she really wants to do. She just wants to ride in a parade, and then she's experience it and be done with it. That's all she cares about. But she doesn't want to wait for Muses, and she can't get into Iris because she's not an old New Orleans family. So she decides that, well, this newer crew is more accepting. There's not a wait list. We'll see if we can get in. I want to get invited into this crew. And of course, she wants Valerie to join with her, and Valerie has no interest in doing that whatsoever. So, and that's from my own experience.
Yeah.
Right. I have absolutely no desire to belong to a Mardi Gras crew. I'm perfectly fine with just walking down to the corner and catching stuff every night for 2 weeks. I don't need to be on a parade. I don't need to be on a float. I don't need to throw things. I've been in a couple of other parades, much smaller scale. So I don't really care that much about being.
Now, do you think it gives anything away to talk about what happens at the ball, or do you want to just keep that? Just say something happens there.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty apparent that someone dies at the ball, and I think it's pretty apparent who it's going to be by the time the person is killed. I think it's pretty clear who that's going to be. So I don't think that's necessarily a spoiler. I didn't realize that I actually reread the book recently when I started having to do all these posts.
Yeah.
And I knew we were doing this. It's like I don't really remember the book quite as well as I did before. Mm-hmm. And it actually surprised me how long it took me to get to the death.
I wondered about that. That's so funny.
Yeah, I was like, wow, she didn't die for a really long time.
Let me transition. That's an interesting thing because I did notice that in transit. Can you talk a little about your writing process? And was it different? Because this is different from anything you've written before, in a way. But although Scotty Bradley, that's kind of that's not like an uncozy series. But anyway.
Scotty, it's interesting. Maybe it was you. You might have been the one who told me that the first time, and I'd never really thought about it. I'd never really put it into the context of that genre but Scotty is kind of a cozy series because he's a private eye. He's a licensed private eye, but nobody ever hires him, and he doesn't need the work. And he started out as a stripper. And he kept stumbling over bodies, and that's how he ended up becoming licensed as a private eye, only he never gets hired to do anything, which I had never really thought about it, but the Scotty books don't necessarily follow the rules.
No, yeah.
But there's a lot of talk about sexuality. There's a lot of talk about sex. There's a lot of there's profanity.
It's edgier, but
on the page, the page. But it is kind of in that aspect of he's an amateur. He's really an amateur who doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's kind of a cozy character. And when you told me that I'd always wondered, because I had always wanted to write one, and I'd thought about it off and on over the years. And when you said that to me, it clicked in my head. Oh, well, yeah, you just write a Scotty book and leave all of that. It's the same thing as writing a Scotty book, only cleaning it up, basically, making it so no shirtless men on the cover of this. And then I started thinking, and then I realized it's like, well, it's really, for me, it's always about the character.
Yeah.
I care about the character, and the story comes from the character. And so it's like, well, cozies are kind of character driven. And so you can come up with a good character that engages the reader, that the reader likes and identifies with. Well, why can't you write one? And
well, I'm just gonna even though it takes a while, the murder does happen a bit later. It's so entertaining because you create the world and you create her friends. These very entertaining women, these strong, successful, quirky women. The way New Orleanians are very quirky and different, which I love. Now, but your writing process, do you outline? Are you just see the pantser? Is it a combination?
It's kind of it's what feels right for that story. Mm-hmm. I learned how to write a novel by outlining. That was how I learned how. That was how I learned how to do it, was by outlining. But the first book that I wrote the outline, and then I wrote the entire manuscript, and then realized that it went off track and I had to throw out the entire second half. So I was like, well, the outline didn't do you any good. You didn't catch it in the outline. You should have caught it in the outline, and I didn't. And I got to the point where it's like, well, when I do outline, I just outline like 5 chapters ahead, and then write the 5 chapters, and then do the next 5, figure out the next 5 chapters, and go like that. Scotty, I just write off the seat of my pants. I mean, that works for him because that's kind of him.
Mm-hmm.
He never knows what he's going to do from day to day to day to day to day. It's just whatever the world throws at him. So I kind of write the books that way too. And I'm figuring it out. I'm figuring out the case as he's figuring out the case too. So it kind of works in that way. The Chance books were a little different in that they were more structured. They followed a more traditional private eye beat structure where, okay, hired by the client, somebody dies by this chapter, something happens by, beat. The private eye novels have a specific rhythm. And so I can follow that with Chance. By the time I was getting to the end of the Chance series, and this is why I actually stopped writing the Chance series, was I didn't have to do the outline anymore. It was like I knew what the beats would come. Okay, chapter 5 is where this happens. Chapter 8 is where this happens. And it's like, okay, now you're painting by the numbers.
Right.
And so you've got this down to such a science that you don't even have to outline it. You know exactly where to put things. And it's like, okay, this isn't a challenge anymore. I don't want to write this series anymore. So I stopped.
Now, let me ask you this, because you've had so many, every time I talk to you, I learn about a new career you had, so you were, or a new place you lived. I mean, you've lived in so many places and done so many things. How do you think that informs your writing? And also, but your writing mostly takes place in the South. I mean, you're standalone. I know I've read the Scotties. Where does that take place?
New Orleans.
New Orleans.
Yeah.
So can you talk about how maybe your past informs your present, your background?
Well, I was born in Alabama. That's where, as we say down here, my people are from. We're from Alabama. So when people ask me what's home, to me, Alabama is home. That's the home place. I haven't lived there since I was 3 years old. Thank you. And no offense to anybody from Alabama, but the part of Alabama we're from is really, really, really back in the hills and the hollers. And my grandmother didn't have my mom grew up without electricity or indoor plumbing.
Wow.
Yeah. So I remember when my grandmother got plumbing in her house.
Wow.
I was 9 when my grandmother got plumbing in her house. So yeah, thank God I didn't grow up there. that would have been horrifying. I admire my parents and my relatives so much for being able to, function. It's inconceivable to me. We moved to Chicago when I was a child, when I was very, very young. I grew up in the city, and we moved to the suburbs when I was 10. And then my dad was transferred when I was 14 to Kansas, which I spent the next 5 years in Kansas. And then my dad was transferred again. And I had already started college at that point, but I was given the option of, you can stay here and continue going to school here in Kansas, or you can move to California with us. And so I moved to California with them. I didn't realize it was Fresno, which was like moving to Topeka.
Yes.
But it was still California. And after California, I moved to Houston, which is when I went to work for Continental Airlines. And I lived in Tampa for a few years. And then I met Paul, and I moved to Minnesota, and I lived in Minneapolis for about 8 months. And then we both moved to New Orleans, and we moved away for a year. We moved away in 2000, but we moved back in 2001, and we consider that the unmentionable time that didn't really happen. I just ignore that. It never happened. We never left New Orleans, and we've always been here since we moved here in 1990s.
Oh, that's great.
So I've been around. Yeah. I've been around a lot, and I always felt outside
Mhm.
When I was in grade school when we were still living in the city, I was in the same class with the same kids I've been in with since kindergarten, so I knew everybody. I was part of the group. I felt different than everybody
Mhm.
else, but I still had friends, and I was very, very comfortable. And then we moved to the suburbs, and I was the new kid.
Yeah.
And then I was at uh, elementary school for one semester, and then I had to go to junior high school, which was a completely different experience because it was all new again. And then high school again was the same kind of thing, because the suburb we lived in was growing exponentially. We originally were being bused to another town because we didn't have a school. And then they were building schools in it was crazy. And then we moved to Kansas and then college. And so I've always really never really had roots anywhere until I
Yeah.
went to New Orleans. So I always was observational. I just paid attention and watched what other people were doing and got a sense of that. I've written books that are set in Kansas. I've written stuff that's
Mm.
set in Alabama, and I primarily do New Orleans. And when I do write about California, it's been so long since I lived in California that I don't really remember. So
Yeah.
I fictionalize that. I've written about. I've changed the name of Fresno to Polk, Polk, because then it's the university is California State University at Polk, which is C as UP.
That's great. So now, so we both write series set in New Orleans, and I have my own feel. I went to Tulane, that's my big connection, and then I just spent a lot of time there after. What do you think? There, you're talking about high school, and one thing that we both, find interesting is that in New Orleans, and it's very much it's because it's a very Catholic city. It's same. I found my husband is from St. Louis, and I find the same thing. Where one way you identify people is saying, "Well, where'd you go to high school?"
Cool. Yeah,
Which is so. I mean, for me, what you did in New York, where I grew up, is you lived in the city or one of the boroughs, like I was from Queens, and then your family just moved to the suburbs. So you just went to the high school that was in the suburb. So, but here in there in New Orleans, it's like even once you know the city and the people, you start to know the high schools.
mm-hmm.
So does that kind of that because your character went to Sacred Heart.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in high school, which is, for people who know New Orleans, that paints a certain kind of picture. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, for me, it paints a very different picture of the people I know who went to Sacred Heart.
Mm-hmm.
So, did she feel like an outsider there? I'm just curious. Did she have some of that outsider quality that you yourself have as a
she
person?
she has some of it. She does have some of that outsider quality, and I did that very deliberately. And that her parents aren't from New Orleans. She was born in New Orleans and she grew up in New Orleans, but her parents aren't from New Orleans, which is a completely different thing than if your family is from New Orleans. As you
Yes.
know, it's a completely different thing. So she is of New Orleans, but she's not of New Orleans.
Yeah.
So she didn't have those family connections, though, that generations of women ahead in her family ahead of her who also went to Sacred Heart. So yeah, she felt
Right.
that was part of her disconnect. Why she just focused on playing soccer and being, doing her stuff, is because she didn't really feel like she fit into Sacred Heart. And I probably will never really go into exploring that a whole lot.
Yeah.
I actually used Sacred Heart, which is a real school. Had
Yes.
had I put more thought into that, I would have probably invented a school that was based on Sacred Heart, because as you know, the parent where her sons went to school
Yes.
is a fictional high school, but it's based on a real high school, and it's the same one that I always use for boys. And Scotty also went there.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so, yeah, but knowing that I was going to be so much about the parents,
Yes.
I could not use the real high school.
Yeah, no, because it's because there's a rivalry between Valerie and another mother that starts in the high school that transfers over into life and makes Valerie's life miserable. And
So
yeah,
I could not do that.
yeah,
I could not use the real high school, and I can dip back into that well. And I don't think anybody who's from New Orleans who'll read the book won't be able to figure out what high school school it is. It's pretty apparent which high school it is. But
Oh, that's funny.
I mean,
Now,
but again, that's New Orleans. You know which high schools are which.
yes. Well, I know, I read your recent blog and you were talking about how your relationship has changed to the city over the years. Do you want to talk a little about that? And does that feed into the book at
Um,
all?
one of the reasons why I wanted to write this, do something different than Scotty that was set in New Orleans, I wanted to do something different, was because I'd been feeling disconnected from the city. I used to work, my office used to be on Frenchman Street, which you're familiar with. I don't know if if anybody watching or listening is familiar with Frenchman Street, but Frenchman Street is in the Marigny, which is the next neighborhood from the French Quarter. So when you're going up Decatur Street, when you're walking up Decatur Street downtown towards the Marigny, when you cross Esplanade on the other side of the street, Decatur is one block, and then Frenchman cuts in, and then you're suddenly on Frenchman Street because Decatur makes a 90-degree angle turn.
And Frenchman to people is probably most known for music. It's tons of music clubs there. Yeah.
My office used to be on Frenchman
Wow.
Street. So I basically worked every day. I was on Frenchman Street. So every day I could go into the Quarter.
Mm-hmm.
For years, I never thought about bringing lunch or anything. And I'll just go get something to eat I'll just walk into the Quarter. I'll just walk down the street to the mom and pop po' boy shop.
I was going to say, go to Johnny's and get a po' boy.
You can go anywhere, Even the little corner groceries have amazing food in New Orleans. And so I could I had a branch of my bank was in the Quarter. So I could go to the bank in the Quarter. I could go to the Walgreens in the Quarter and pick up prescriptions. It was great. So I felt like I was really always in the Quarter a lot. And the Quarter really is the heart of New Orleans. All the rest of the city just expands out from the heart of New Orleans. And so for me, being down there and being part of the French Quarter made me feel more part of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And then our office moved. And now we're in a whole different other part of the city.
Where are you? What part of the city?
We're in the 7th Ward.
Okay. Almost
to Gentilly. They've renamed the neighborhood St. Roch.
Oh, okay.
Or they're calling it it's Claiborne and Elysian Fields.
Got it.
Basically, is where our office is.
Okay.
And I don't go to the Quarter anymore. And so when I used to go work in the Marigny, the only way to get home to and from work was I had to go through the Quarter, and I had to go through the Central Business District to get to my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And there was no other way to get around. There was just no getting around it. That was the only way you could do it. And now I can take the highway and get off at Claiborne at Elysian Fields, and I'm at work, and I miss all of that. I don't see it anymore. So I was starting to feel like I wasn't really connected to the city anymore. And I wasn't feeling like we didn't have Mardi Gras in 2020. It was all kinds of stuff. And the last Mardi Gras we had was a bad one. The 2019 Mardi Gras was bad. That was...
Well, 2020, because that's right before my daughter, who went to Loyola, that was right when she caught COVID. Then everyone was catching it right before the city shut down. So that was a bad Mardi Gras too. And in 2019, people were killed.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm getting them backwards. 2020 was the bad Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
Because the pandemic shut everything down like less than a month later, and the virus was already in New Orleans.
Yeah, all the college kids had it early, but we didn't know what it was.
Yeah, nobody knew what it was. And people got killed at that Mardi Gras, at parades.
Yes, for people who don't know, they sped up to save money on the police force, and to make the parades go faster, they sped up some of the floats, and people get drunk and get between the float and the tractor pulling it, and
get run over. And cut one person in half. It's like,
oh God.
Needless to say, that kind of ends the parade. Death kind of ends the parade.
Oh, that's a great title. Death Ends the Parade. One of us has to use it.
That is a great title. I was just thinking that as it was coming out of my mouth. But the part of the parade that was ahead of the person who got the death continues on, which is even crazier.
But it's New
So
Orleans. You don't end
it's
up.
New Orleans. So it didn't affect us. I don't know where the rest of the parade is, but we're still drinking and we're still going. And then it's like, is it over already? What
Yeah.
happened to the parade? And then come to find out, oh, someone got killed.
I got us off track, but anyway, so you felt a little disconnected.
So I wanted to feel connected to the city again. And when I started writing about Valerie, and I was having to go look at the neighborhood I was writing about and remembering the neighborhood that I chose Valerie's neighborhood because when the first friends I've made in New Orleans lived in that neighborhood. They actually.
By the way, Irish Channel is where my protagonist lives. So.
And so I had them live. I have but the house that they lived in is Valerie's house now.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I always do that. I kind of do that. Chance lived in my old apartment.
Oh,
So
wow.
he lives in our apartment where we first lived when we first moved here.
So did you kind of fall in love again with the city writing the book?
Well, what I realized was that the reason I was feeling disconnected about the city wasn't because I wasn't really connected to the city anymore. It's because I had finally adapted.
Oh.
So stuff that 10 years ago I would think, oh, that's so crazy, I got to write about that, now just seems normal. So it doesn't change. So I don't react to it the way that I used to. Now it's just normal. And then realized the light bulb went on in my head. And well, that's why the city is still, because I really was feeling like, well, New Orleans isn't as crazy as it used to be. It's not as eccentric as it used to be. It's not the same city it used to be. Oh yeah, it is. You're just used to it now. So you don't know.
That's so funny because there's something, we talk about a little like that, in New Orleans, you never say north, south, east, or west because the river, I will never know what direction is. And people ask you for directions. And I say, well, you head uptown or you head downtown, or well, go towards the river or towards the lake. And a friend of mine, Deborah, who I've met through writing, Deborah Jo Burnett, her husband, John, is an NOPD officer. And we talked about it once. And I said, it's like, I feel almost embarrassed. And he goes, as police officers, they say, he's heading toward the river. He's heading toward the lake. He's heading uptown. He's heading toward the quarter. Like they don't say he's going east, west, north, or south.
People will ask me which compass directions, and I have no idea. No idea. My office where I'm sitting right now I'm in a bay window in my kitchen, and I face the West Bank. I face the river. It's blocks away, but I face the river. And one morning, I used to have all these beautiful crepe myrtles along the fence line, and then they cut them all down. So now I have direct sunlight coming into my windows in the morning, but my office faces the West Bank. So the morning sun shines into my windows from the West Bank. It's like,
well, that's the joke, that you have to go east to go to the West Bank.
You have to go east to go to the west. You have to go east to go to the North Shore. The West Bank is actually east, and directions don't make sense. Compass directions don't make sense here. And don't rent a car. Don't rent a car.
Well,
I'll allow you to rent one because
Well, but we've racked up the other thing, which is school zone tickets, that they have this habit that feeds the Treasury New Orleans of if you will go 21 miles in a 20-hour school zone, you get a ticket, and it's all they send you. The pictures, they take photo stuff, but sometimes they don't tell you that school zone is starting. They'll say you've exited the school zone. I'm like, wait, I didn't know I was in one. And I actually, in Bayou Book Thief, I use that it alibis a couple school zone tickets, alibi a couple of my characters, and the other characters are like, oh, the one time I didn't get a ticket.
Well, the thing that's weird about those is I don't think they're doing it anymore.
Oh, well, they were doing it as of May because we got 3 tickets.
It's weird because I haven't gotten one in a long time.
Yeah, and for going literally 23 miles in a 20-mile zone.
And I would usually get one every 3 or 4 months because, like you said, in most there's maybe one sign that tells you it's a school zone, and it might be behind a live oak tree.
I was just gonna say, yes.
I got one. I got, this is my favorite. I got one and they don't tell you what date it actually was either. It's around this date, because
I cheated that.
I got a ticket. I got 2 tickets that I got out of, because even though it says around, there is a date on it. And they gave me a ticket for doing 26 in a school zone on a Sunday in July.
Oh,
July. Like, no, school zones aren't in effect in the summer. And even if they did, it's a Sunday.
yeah.
And the other time I was able to prove that I was out of town on the day I supposedly got the ticket.
Oh,
It's like, well, here's my boarding pass.
yeah.
Going or coming. Did I fly back here just so I could speed in that school zone that day? I don't think so. So I got out of those.
And by speed, you were going what my husband likes to call in New Orleans parade speed, which is like,
Yeah, yes.
mm.
Because you can't drive fast in New Orleans anywhere.
Well, let's talk briefly about the speed, the cones, the pothole cones that you and I have both used in our books. So my favorite was the one that's opposite the skeleton house in Halloween. A pothole so big there was a cone in it, and someone put a sign on it that said La Brea with an arrow pointing down to Middle Earth.
Yes. Well, you never know how deep they are. That's the scary thing about the potholes. You don't know how big they are, and you don't know how deep they are. That's why the one on our street, the one I wrote about in that blog post, I mean, I was thinking about that today because when I came home from work, because the street's already, I felt the dip in the street. It's like, oh yeah, it's coming back. It'll be back soon. It's going to be back soon. And one of the potholes got me yesterday.
Yep.
Ate one of my tires. An active pothole ate one of my tires yesterday. So,
well, and Wind and Died in New Orleans. At the end, there's a scene. A hurricane comes, and there's a pothole that basically is it going to turn into a little pool, like a swimming pool, basically, and a little pet, has to be rescued. So, that's. So now tell us what you're up to now, or what you're working on, what we can look forward to in the future, and then we'll bring John back.
Oh my gosh, it's almost 8 o'clock. I've just been babbling for an hour.
Entertaining.
Right now I'm writing another Scotty book. Right now.
Great.
And it's called Mississippi River Mischief. And it's not actually in New Orleans. I mean, obviously parts of it in New Orleans, but it's in one of the river parishes. Takes place in the river parishes. I'm starting to expand out of New Orleans into the rest of Louisiana.
Well, welcome to the Cajun country world. Although my series is actually really kind of the river parishes too, but Cajun.
Well, that's the nice thing about it, is that the nice thing about writing about outside of New Orleans is I feel comfortable making stuff up about the rest of Louisiana. I can invent a parish.
That's it.
Nobody will mind if you invent a parish, but if you invent a street in New Orleans, you'll get run out of town on a rail.
I did it. People are going to have to put up with it.
But one of the nice things about that too is that there are so many side streets and back alleys and things in New Orleans that there could be a street like that the locals don't know about. The street I live on only exists for 3 blocks.
Oh, and you're in the Lower Garden District, right?
Yeah. The United Cab stand is on the other side of St. Charles. That's where their home base is. When you call United Cab, it's on my street. We would have to spell our street name for them, and they didn't know what we were talking about. We're literally 2 blocks from your office. We're on the same street.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I've never heard of that street. You're on it.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's so funny. John, hi.
Hello. So I've got a couple of crowd questions before we get into them. Ellen, can you tell anybody who might not be familiar with the Bayou Book Thief, can you tell them a little bit about your cookbook series?
Yes, it's the Vintage Cookbook Mysteries, and this is the first one, Bayou Book Thief, and then Wined and Dined is now coming out February 7th, Wined and Dined in New Orleans. And my protagonist opens up a gift shop that sells vintage cookbooks and kitchenware in a culinary house museum called Bon Vie that is in the Garden District. and it's the home of a late female restaurateur who was inspired by a real restaurateur, Ella Brennan. And there are a couple of peacocks who give people attitude, and it's great fun to write, and it includes recipes from my own collection of vintage cookbooks. There are always about 4 or 5 recipes in the back of the books that were inspired by my own collection, because I collect vintage cookbooks.
Awesome. So one of the things that I think you both do really well is you take a city like New Orleans that you wouldn't think, most cozies are set in a little small town, a little small village, but you guys both managed to write about New Orleans and make it feel like a small town, which I don't know that people would perceive it as being such a tourist mecca and having so many people there all the time. So how do you write about a city like that and still give it that small town feel that readers come to know and love for cozies? Let's start with Ellen.
Well, you know what? I have to say that I did it for 2 cities, and I did it. My Maria DeRico series, The Catering Hall, takes place in New York, in Queens. So I think, these urban cozies, I think it's really the same thing. You create a community. When I lived on the Upper West Side of New York, I had an incredible little community. It felt like a small town. And I think New Orleans in its own way is a small town. It's, New York is different. I mean, I really focused on the block and that specific neighborhood of Astoria, and then I take my protagonist into Manhattan, which is great fun because it's, my old stomping grounds. And I think for both of us, it's really wonderful to make people feel like these cities are beloved, beautiful, unique, small towns in their own way. Greg, what do you think?
New Orleans is a small town.
Yeah.
We have a large population base, but New Orleans is a very small town. When I first moved here, I was told, and I still say this, nobody knows what it means anymore because I'm so old, but they used to say that New Orleans is a block long and everyone's on a party line.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's true. If I don't know somebody, I know somebody who does. We're all like 1 degree of separation away from everybody else in the city of New Orleans. And New Orleans is a very community-based city. Every neighborhood is very distinctive and has its own personality and its own flavor. So I was writing about the Irish Channel. Scotty lives in the French Quarter. Chance lives in the Lower Garden District. I write different neighborhoods all the time. I was a little worried about that myself because New Orleans is not your traditional small cozy town. It's not your Cabot Cove but then when I broke it down to the sense of community, everybody who lives in New Orleans has a very strong sense of community.
Yes.
Ellen can attest to this.
Oh, absolutely.
People who live in New Orleans will complain about everything there is about New Orleans, but let somebody not from New Orleans do that.
That's so funny.
His ranks.
The other thing is, though, writing to the real of a city, because, especially having we both had to evacuate because I happened to be in New Orleans for Ida, and seeing the effect that on the city. And also, I was just talking about a friend whose husband is an NOPD officer. I mean, crime, I struggle with, you don't want to paint such a rosy picture that it feels fake. But that actually works into it. Like for my series, I mean, the fact that the NOPD is so overwhelmed with crime, it really makes, I write to that. And it's like, it's whack-a-mole. Like they're working on whatever happened for my protagonist, but then it falls down, it drops in priority because something worse has happened. But that makes it more important for amateur sleuths to step up and fill in that void, because what might be less important to NOPD because they're dealing with so much is of primary importance to our characters. But it justifies, I think, their amateur sleuthing. So it works an advantage that way.
And I have to imagine that being in a town like that where so many people vacation or tourists and stuff also helps you escape kind of the Cabot Cove syndrome, because you have an influx of new people literally all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's where we don't really pay a whole lot. lot of attention to like conventions and things, so I never know what's in town, but there's always something. There's always some enormous convention going on in town. But whenever there's things like sporting events that are coming, and then you find out who's going to be playing in the sporting events, like, oh, great, they're in the Super Bowl again this year. Hooray. Can't wait for them to get here.
But, I do find, and I'm sure same with you, there's so much to write about because the culture is so strong there. It's not just your traditional city, and it's so unique and so specific that the Cajun countries were set at a B&B. So I was able to like milk, that constant stream of people coming in and going, and as for stories, but still the root of it, and especially for New Orleans, is like, I want to write about Halloween, how they celebrate it there, because everything is so, I want to write about Mardi Gras. It's so unique and specific, just the life people lead there. Like I was saying, I have a friend, she's in one of the dance troupes. So there's a character in my book, the landlady of my protagonist is in a dance troupe called the Abba-Dabba-Doos, which is a cross, a mashup of the Flintstones and ABBA. So, I was really proud of myself for that.
Greg Marco wants to know, he says, you've written dozens of books in different genres. Is there any kind of genre that you're still dying to write or tackle?
Ooh, what a great question, Greg. That one's for you.
Did we lose you?
You kind of broke up. I didn't hear the last part.
So Marco wants to know, because you've written in so many genres, is there any kind of story or genre or something that you're still just itching to write? Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I barely. Yeah. Oh my God. I have so many ideas for books and so many different genres and so many different styles. I'll never live long enough to write everything that I want to write. I really would love to try something. Fantasy and science fiction is so completely out of my wheelhouse, but I love it. Yeah. That writing it is terrifying to me because, like, oh my God, you have to make up everything. Universes and planets and different kinds of beings and things that I can't even imagine. I have so much trouble keeping track of my characters in New Orleans. I can't imagine, but I've always wanted to write something like Star Wars-y. Or Dune, something like that, or Indiana Jones. I would love to write a gay Indiana Jones. I always kind of wanted to spin off God, I can't remember my characters' names. Scotty's third, Colin, the international agent. I always wanted to give him his own series so we could see what he's doing when he's not in New Orleans with them, and have him kind of be like Indiana Jones kind of thing, Indiana Jones kind of nonstop action adventure. But it's also intimidating as hell to write something like that because that's a lot of action. Yeah, a lot of action. I like to write about people sitting around talking a lot. How about you, Ellen? Is there any subgenre or anything like that you're dying to get to that's not a cozy?
I wrote a standalone that's a combination of suspense and some historical, and it was the hardest thing I've ever written, and it doesn't really have a lot of humor in it, which is, it's more serious and it feels kind of alien to me. So I'd like to write more suspense, but I'd like to write humorous suspense. Yeah. Something like I think like a Romancing the Stone kind of thing would be fun to write. I have no idea how to do it, but it would be really fun. And I'd love to be able to write historical, but I mean it's like the way you're intimidated by science fiction. I was lucky because the standalone I wrote, part of it is historical. It's a man remembering events from when he was 9 years old. And it's based on what happened to me with my grandfather, my Jewish grandfather I never knew. He was a low-level mobster and just disappeared in 1933. So I created this series where he ends up fictionalizing it, where they moved to to New Orleans. And I set it in New Orleans because New Orleans looks so much now. It's like easy to imagine what it looked like 80 years ago because it really doesn't look that different in so much of it.
I actually do have an actual answer to that question now that I've thought about it and listened to Ellen a little bit. It's like, I know what I want to write next. I want to, that's not a, that out of my norm, I want to write a romance.
Oh,
I've never written a romance. I've written a couple of romance short stories, but I've never written a romance novel.
I will never be able to write romance because I cannot write sex scenes or even, I'm not my wheel. I've tried and it's been an epic fail.
I've written many. Many.
All right, last question before we head out tonight. We'll start with Greg on this one. What is something that you've read lately that you've loved?
Besides Bayou Book Thief by Ellen.
Oh, God, I was just going to say, besides A Streetcar Named Murder.
I can actually show you what I'm reading right now, and I'm loving. It's Wanda Morris's Anywhere You Run. It's amazing. I need to find more time to read.
I literally cannot remember what I read last. I think I did read, I alternate between reading mysteries and nonfiction. I read The Capote Women, and I'm fascinated by that, that kind of like the past in New York and the high society and those kind of like the swans, like Truman Capote's swans.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fascinating to me.
Did you see that there's coming out about Truman Capote and Anne Woodward?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that.
For those who don't know, Anne Woodward was a society, married into society, killed her husband, said she didn't recognize him, and then it was like, anyway, it's going to be great. That's so up my alley.
Shot him with a rifle and didn't recognize him.
I think it might be out now. I completely blanked out. I think the title is it, but Sally, who works at the store, has read it and absolutely loved it.
It has
cruelty in the title.
Yes. Okay.
Deliberate cruelty.
That's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Tennessee Williams. Deliberate cruelty.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's going to be next time I read. I think I actually may have put that on hold at the library.
I am dropping a link for it and the other ones that they just mentioned in the comments. So if anybody wants to check those out.
I wanted to say that in addition to the gift certificates that if you pre-order either Wined and Dined or Four Parties in a Funeral, which is out on March 28th, if you that's the fourth catering hall mystery, and those books, I have to give myself credit, they're really funny.
Yeah, they are.
They're kind of hilarious. That's my TV sitcom voice. I will send if John lets me know how many people have pre-ordered, I will send bookmarks and a recipe card and also a signed book plate for your orders to go with the gift certificates.
Perfect. Awesome. So that is going to do it for us this evening. So if anybody has joined us late, we have been chatting with T.G. Herren, who's Greg Herren, because his new book, A Streetcar Named Murder, just came out today. And we have been chatting with Ellen Byron, who has the first book in the vintage cookbook series, Bayou Book Thief, is out now. And the second one, Wined and Dined in New Orleans, is going to be out on February 7th of next year. And as she mentioned, we've got some certificates that we can email you if you were planning on buying it for gifts for the holidays to let your recipient know that there is a copy waiting for them when the book is released. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive the video so you can go back and rewatch it. We've gotten in chat with Ellen a couple of times about, we got to do a great event with her and Karen White when Bayou Book Thief came out. So that's up on the YouTube channel. We also got to chat with Greg last year when the book that I cannot think of the name of came out.
That's right.
Is that the standalone?
Very Mean Shadows.
Yeah, that one. Very Mean Shadows. Yeah.
David Slayton.
With David Slayton. Yeah, so those are all up on the YouTube channel as well. Greg, Ellen, it was so great to see both of you. I hope at some point soon-ish we get to actually get you in the store so we can do this in person. But until then, it was really great to actually get to chat with both of you.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks to everyone who's watched or will watch. Really appreciate it.
Buy my book. Buy my book.
Buy his book. Buy his book. And buy my books.
I want to retire. Buy my book.
Good luck.
Y'all have a good night. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.